Hey everyone, Murray Rundus here for CFN here in Rome, and we just saw black smoke from the Sistine Chapel. And this is the second day of voting now. And what that means is that there's been three consecutive ballots that have been inconclusive. They didn't have a majority, because that means in the morning we didn't see white smoke, which means it was a failed vote. The voting last night, which took a long time, it went hours over the very latest that the Vatican told us we could see smoke, and it went later than that, and we saw black smoke. So we didn't see white smoke this morning, we saw black smoke last night, and we saw black smoke just now. So that means that's 3 votes. Now, the voting that is going to continue tonight, the Cardinals will return this afternoon going into the evening. That's going to be very important. John Paul I and Benedict XVI were elected in 4 ballots, 4 votes. Pope Francis was elected in 5. The Cardinals have 2 votes that they have to do tonight, so just looking at the history of it, there's a good chance the Cardinals could decide. However, coming into the conclave, many people thought that, just hearing the consensus, and this is something I was rather skeptical over, people thought Cardinal Parolin had the votes coming in. This is going to be a very quick conclave. I think as the voting goes on, we're seeing more and more that indeed Cardinal Parolin did lose a lot of steam coming into the conclave. And the more votes we get, I think the more likely it is either that there was a conservative backlash and the Liberals are going to be forced to give a more conservative candidate or make some concessions, or this could just be a result from the pandemonium, the confusion that we saw coming into the conclave. So I'm going to give a few stories here from some pre-conclave analysis, some stories that might explain what we are seeing here with this historic conclave. We've already seen some unprecedented things occur with the smoke going later into the night, and a lot of the controversy and the drama between the Cardinals. So enjoy these stories and make sure you're praying for the Cardinals and praying for the church. Right as we entered this conclave, we saw a lot of end moves, I will say. And of course, there's going to be some politicking going on in the conclave. There's always been that. But I think this one is unique, especially in the modern period, which may just be because of the presence of social media. But it's very unique just because of the amount of drama between the Cardinals. Now, of course, as we've reported multiple times, there are these 2 distinct factions that have formed. That's not a mythical reality. One would simply be naive if we thought every one of these cardinals were pious men completely detached from the political realities around them or completely detached from the controversies facing the church. I think people are kind of misinformed when they say, don't make the conclave about politics, when really people are making it about theological issues, which of course is going to be concerning the conclave picking the next leader of the Catholic Church. But these cardinals are extremely divided, and the recent attacks, hit pieces on one another, that has really shown this to be especially true. One I wanted to really highlight is the amount of calamity we've simply seen from the conclave. There was a case, Cardinal Arborelius from Sweden. He came out with a statement saying he was very discouraged as he saw cardinals show up for one meeting, then leave after that, never to be seen again. He saw other cardinals would only go to a few meetings. Nobody knows where they are. That is concerning. There was a statement from Cardinal Mueller, which I found extremely interesting. He said that a cardinal barged in. He's a cardinal from an island of only 25 Catholics. He said, I want you to know 3 things. I don't speak English. I don't know why they made me a cardinal, and I know nothing about theology. So that's a cardinal who's going to be voting for the next leader of the Catholic Church. All of this is very concerning. It shows that people are divided on language. People are divided on theology. There are distinct factions within the church. So I think it's anyone's game going into the actual vote, even though, as Sarah Vervai and I have covered in past episodes, there's definitely clear favorites to come out with the papal tiara, even though it's not used anymore. So I want to begin by looking at an article from the New York Times, which made a lot of motion in the Conclave news. And I want to focus on one point, which we've talked about before, these comments from Cardinal Czerny, who I really think has been he's been misplacing his words. He is a clear progressive candidate. I wouldn't say he's even a candidate. He's not in the running for being Pope. A clear progressive cardinal, though, an ally of Francis. He initially opposed Cardinal Mueller's rallying cry of unity in doctrinal clarity, saying we don't need unity. That's something that shouldn't really be a focus. That was, I think it was a mistake for him to say that, but he has gone on to say things I think are even more offensive than that. So I want to read this part concerning the LGBT issue in the church. So the article starts by looking at, as they say, the most frequently cited candidate from Africa, Cardinal Ambongo, who is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this article says, quote, he was a favorite of Francis who appreciated his pastoral pedigree, but he opposed a rule change Francis made permitting of blessings of same-sex couples. Instead, he has pushed other priorities like pastoral care for polygamists. Pausing there, notice the New York Times isn't stuck in the insane asylum blinded by their own prejudices. They understand that what was actually published by Pope Francis was a document permitting blessings for same-sex couples, as anybody who would go up to the front of the church and see two men holding hands being blessed at the front of the church would recognize that to be. No one in their right mind is going to say that a reality like that is a priest making an individual blessing of two distinct men for their repentance. And he can't be bothered to say two blessings. He just happened to move it into one for who knows what reason. That is simply a deception, and it was kind of shameful to see, I will say, many of the pro-Francis advocates pushing for that near the end of his pontificate. The New York Times, the secular media, they don't even bother making those distinctions. They know it for what it is, and they say it there. And that's what the African cardinals thought of as well. The emphasis does not thrill European conservatives, and the question is whether they are willing to overlook it to advance other priorities, the article goes on. It has also infuriated liberals who call for more inclusion of LGBTQ Catholics and women in the church, and who see a clear politically motivated double standard. And it quotes the Father James Martin. He's been quite a figure in the Catholic Church. They quote him saying, which is more widespread, polygamy or homosexuality, said the Father James Martin, an American who personally received encouragement from Francis for his ministry to LGBTQ Catholics. Quote, why does one deserve pastoral consideration and the other condemnation? Also note again, the New York Times is just reading the situation at face value. They're not going through this insane double think, trying to make it out that Francis didn't know who Father Martin was, despite knowing him for many years and appointing him to special positions. They simply say he encouraged his ministry. And so those who sought to hide their father's nakedness and tried to hide some of Francis's more embarrassing statements, I think that was a violation of truth. I don't think we could have said that sincerely. And here the New York Times admits it was an encouragement of Father Martin. The article goes on, Cardinal Ambongo is hardly the most conservative African cardinal. Cardinal Robert Sarah of Guinea led the resistance to Francis and is feared by liberals who see him as someone who would yank the church backward. And here's the quote from Cardinal Czerny. Quote, I can think of some African cardinals. They make me shudder, Cardinal Czerny said. I hate saying it in that theatrical way, but it's what this quote sounds like. I have no clue why he would even say something like this. It's not fitting of a cardinal. He says, the article says, asked whether conservatives were rallying behind an African pope as a Trojan horse to further their agenda, Cardinal Czerny said, certainly, certainly, certainly. And that's why, he added, it's so, so, so stupid to say things like Africa's time has come. I don't think it's fitting for a cardinal, a prince of the church, to be speaking like a teenage girl in bad-mouthing other cardinals like this in very informal, ridiculous language. So I think this was a mistake for Cardinal Czerny. Again, it goes to this general trend that the liberals have come across as being very disorganized, very scatterbrained coming into this conclave. The conservatives, not so. The conservatives have uh, been very clear in their messaging, haven't made really any mistakes, and they've avoided scandals, and there's been a lot of them for the liberal candidates. The next article, I will say, it's come as a bit of a shock just to see the amount of hit pieces against the liberals. You wouldn't expect this, and I think this shows people are tired of the Francis pontificate. Bishop Barron came out with a statement yesterday saying he wants a quiet pope, a pope that really just is not going to make a lot of waves. I think that's very true. But seeing this targeted attack against the liberals has been something very interesting to see. And we've seen it with a candidate we've said has been losing steam, along with Cardinal Parolin, who's lost a lot of steam recently. But Cardinal Tagle, who a couple years ago, maybe even more like 3 years ago, was seen as the favorite of the liberals. He was Francis II. He was going to go in. He is the young version of Francis who's going to continue his legacy. Well, here is an article from the Italian press, the Daily Compass, saying Tagle, the cardinal who loves casinos. Now, before I begin with going into this, I think a lot of this is speculation. I will say that they kind of mix truth with speculation here. And I think, generally speaking, someone like a cardinal of the church should be given the benefit of the doubt. But the fact that this accusation is being made of this sort of attachment to gambling and gambling scandals, it's going to hurt Cardinal Tagle's chances just by being something in the press, if Cardinal Tagle had any chances at all. The article says the name of the Filipino cardinal is one of the most popular among candidates. He talks a lot about the poor and is so moved in every speech, but he likes to visit the billionaires who control the casinos of the Pacific, and several sources concord that he himself regularly gambles in the casinos of Macau. Among the names circulating as possible candidates, one that stands out is that of 67-year-old Filipino Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, a prominent prelate in the Roman Curia, but with a block of Asian cardinals that has grown from 2 in 1963 to 23 today, 20 of whom have been appointed by Pope Francis, even for very small dioceses of 1,500 souls, Mongolia. Pausing really quick, I don't think it's accurate to portray this as the Asian cardinals will necessarily have loyalty to other Asians. Same even with the Africans. That might be running in their minds. I don't think that's how this conclave is shaking out to be, though. I do think it's more divided on ideological lines. I think these cardinals are interested in getting somebody in there who will help them on specific issues rather than just being from the region. An example I can give, somebody who is interested in the affairs of China, if he is convinced that a candidate who happens to be Asian is going to be more for or against the Chinese agreement, that's going to make him against the candidate whether he is Asian or not. And so if he is against the Chinese deals, he might look to a European or an African who is skeptical of those deals, and we'll proceed from there. So I'm not convinced with that framing, but the article does go on. Appointed Archbishop of Manila by Benedict XVI, Tagle was then called to Rome in 2019 by Pope Francis as prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, replacing Cardinal Fernando Filoni, who was promoted to Grand Master of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre when he had 3 years left to complete his term as prefect. Filoni was probably paying for his reservations about the agreement between the Vatican and China on the appointment of bishops, while Tagle had always been enthusiastic. And you see, that's more like it. Those are the kind of issues that people are going to be thinking about. Those are the politics in Rome. There's a general sense of just where is the Vatican going to get money from? Western donors or Chinese money? That's a basic thing. It's rather surface level in some ways, but it's certainly on many people's minds. It's on the mind of people in the Curia, certainly. With the reform of the Curia in 2022, the article says, and the creation of the dicastery for evangelization under the leadership of Pope Francis, Tagle became pro-prefect, retaining oversight of Asia, Africa, and Oceania, and many dioceses in Latin America, for a total of nearly 1,200 dioceses, more than a third of the total number of dioceses in the world. The appointment of new bishops or cardinals in the area covered by the dicastery for evangelization depends largely on pro-prefect Tagle. In conclusion, 68 cardinals, more than half of those in the conclave, come from Asia, Latin America, Oceania, and Africa, and almost all of them have links with Tagle. It is therefore very likely that Cardinal Tagle will be a strong candidate in the first rounds of voting. Possibly in the first rounds of voting, he will be a candidate that will receive some votes. I don't know about strong candidate. I don't think that's accurate. I think he would receive a limited number of votes simply because the other progressives don't have as many scandals around them. They weren't abandoned by Francis as Tagle eventually was when the scandal came out about the charitable organization he was with called Caritas. So I don't see Cardinal Tagle being a favorite coming into this. I don't think he will receive more than 20 votes unless the liberals really rallied around him before this conclave, and there's no evident signs that has happened. The article goes on, though. But who is Tagle? He is known for his training in the Bologna school, which interprets the Second Vatican Council as a rupture, a new beginning in the history of the Church, a new beginning that was blocked and betrayed by John Paul II and Benedict XVI. That's an interesting way of viewing the Second Vatican Council. In many ways, I do think there were ruptures in the Second Vatican Council, but here I think the article is coming from the perspective of the hermeneutic of continuity and sees anything that sort of questions the Second Vatican Council as being something new, as being something that needs to be opposed. And so I think what the Pope Francis pontificate has shown us is that there are deeper questions to be asked about the Second Vatican Council, but certainly Tagle has one of the more liberal interpretations of the Second Vatican Council you can get. According to Tagle, the article says, the source of renewal has been reopened with the election of Francis. See his article, Black Week at Vatican II, in the Comprehensive History of the Second Vatican Council. Tagle has never deviated from the most extreme positions of Francis in the Philippine Bishops' Conference, unique among the world's bishops' conferences, has not coincidentally interpreted Amoris Laetitia as a general green light to give communion to irregular couples, which once again, we're not making explanations trying to say Amoris Laetitia actually didn't say that at all. It said the opposite. We're looking at it at face value, and everybody can say there was a ambiguity that was abused or just blatant falsehoods in things like Fiducia Supplicans and Amoris Laetitia. Going on, listening to several of Tagle's speeches, there's a common thread. Tagle cries in almost every speech, but he always cries for the suffering caused by material conditions, violence, lack of work or money, abandonment, injustice. Of course, material conditions cause great suffering, and the church tries to alleviate them, but this is not the church's goal. Pausing there, that can be... the church has many different goals. I think a better word there would probably be to say it's not its final end, it's not its principal goal perhaps, but the church has historically taken care of those in material want, taking care of the poor, taking care of the sick. So I think there is a danger of going too far in one direction, saying that the church should only be a supernatural spiritual society that has nothing to do with the material world. No, the church has always been involved in hospitals, charitable organizations. We have to be careful there. But there is something in that there can be an overabundance the other way, an overabundance on considering the material conditions, seeing them as equal to the spiritual conditions of the soul. So, for example, a Hindu who is sick, a pagan who is sick, refusing to evangelize the person, worrying that would make the person stressed and worse than his health, that would, of course, having the ends upside down. And so in reality, we should look for both. We should look to aid the sick, but also bring them the gospel. And the article does emphasize this, bringing the people the gospel. It says, the church's mission is to proclaim the good news that frees the human heart from selfishness and opens the heavens, to experience the kingdom of heaven already, to discover God's love and providence even in the midst of suffering. And that is true. We need to make our suffering supernatural, and not see it as necessarily something that needs to be an evil, in the sense that any kind of suffering must be immediately taken care of, not embraced. That would be going against the gospel. I would agree with that. They go on, the Marxist approach does not understand that the greatest sufferings are not material, but spiritual. I'd say that's true. I don't necessarily think Tagle is a Marxist. I don't think we can conclude that. We can conclude a lot of things of Cardinal Tagle. I don't necessarily think he is a Marxist, just from what the article has said so far. Experiencing meaninglessness or absurdity, even when one has a full stomach and a secure future. This is why there are 3 suicides per 100,000 people in the very poor Philippines, 8 times as many in rich Japan, and 10 times as many in very rich South Korea. Tagle, however, does not speak of spiritual suffering, but weeps over material suffering. Asked by an interviewer who his true teachers were, Tagle named the Latin American liberation theologians, Boff, Gutierrez, and Segundo Galilea. And among women, the next 3 most extreme feminist theologians, Elizabeth Johnson, Elizabeth Schuschler of Fiorenza, and Rosemary Ruther, who preach anger and resentment. And I think those are valid criticisms to make of Cardinal Tagle, completely. And again, if we want to say he's even leaning in the Marxist direction, I think that we could certainly say that. There are definitely problematic statements that Cardinal Tagle has made. But while he is moved by material poverty, the article goes on, his friendships reveal another truth. A key friendship in understanding him is that with Monsignor James Benavente, well known on the island of Guam and rector of the cathedral. Benavente is known for the luxury for which he surrounds himself, including cars, houses, 3 of which he bought for himself, an entire condominium for his family, expensive restaurants, and exclusive parties at 5-star resorts and hotels such as the Saipan World Center and the Magati Shangri-La in Manila. He has been the subject of several investigations for financial fraud, and according to Cardinal Filoni, the dossier on him at the Dicastery for Evangelization is so extensive that despite Tagle's support, he was never appointed Bishop of Guam. And I think that shows that maybe Cardinal Tagle doesn't have the amount of influence that has been said, that people have said he has. Tagle and Benavente were both made Knights of the Holy Sepulchre in Manila on the same day in 2010 by the Order's Governor General, who traveled specially from Europe. Benavente is very close to the millionaire Calvo family, who are the main benefactors of Guam's cathedral. The Calvos owned the Bank of Saipan, the main investor in the construction of casinos on Saipan, and an FBI investigation found that Imperial Pacific, the Saipan casino built by Chinese entrepreneurs with Calvo money, collected more money from gaming tables in 6 months in 2017 than all the casinos in Macau. In China, one of the former colonies in China. Considering that the amount of money circulating in Macau is much higher than in Las Vegas, one can begin to get an idea of the scale of the business we are talking about. The FBI shut down the casinos on charges of money laundering. Thanks to his friendship with the Calvos, Benavente introduced Tagle to the 2 big Chinese-Filipino families that control much of the casino industry in the Pacific, and for whom access to Guam and Saipan is the gateway to the United States, just as Macau is the gateway to China, the Tsai family and the Tan family. In particular, Teresita Tsai Coson, a Filipino billionaire ranked 9th on the Forbes list, and her mother, Felicita Tan, a major benefactor of the Diocese of Imus, the first diocese where Tagle became bishop, and the Diocese of Manila. Teresita is vice president of SM Investment Corporation, which owns casinos throughout the Pacific through Bell Corporation and casinos in Macau through Melco Corporation, We are talking about billions and billions of dollars in an industry that is growing enormously and steadily in China and the United States. It is not just a matter of friends and acquaintances. There are at least 5 sources who wish to remain anonymous, and pausing, that's a problem. With these sort of things, if we're going to be accusing a prince elector of the church, I think you should not be anonymous, even though I understand those who wish to be. It can ruin somebody's life, especially in these major incidences like this. The fact that there are 5 sources here, and I've heard from others who have their own connections for how, whatever that might mean, who are also remaining anonymous, that they also confirm this. But here's what they say, including 3 from Macau, who concord that Cardinal Tagle regularly gambles in Macau casinos through a proxy or avatar who places bets for him. Whether this is a gambling addiction or something else is unknown, but it is certain that Tagle is a part of a network of billionaires all involved in the development of casinos in the Pacific. And it is natural to think that this is also the financial source of the short and long videos, expensive productions that have been flooding all the media and social networks for a month. From YouTube to TikTok, promoting Tagle as the next pope, extolling his extraordinary abilities, his compassion, his immigrant origins, his grandfather. Well, I don't agree with that necessarily. I think that they're not expensive productions that have been circling on TikTok and YouTube. These are simple productions, actually, that just young people on TikTok are making, young liberals on TikTok oftentimes, or people doing it as a joke. But I think the article raises some good points. That's why I wanted to read it in full. I don't think one can read that and come out with the conclusion that Cardinal Tagle is a completely safe candidate to put in charge of this very tumultuous time of the church. I think Cardinal Tagle, just from this article and from the concerns that have been circling around, I doubt he would be made pope. I doubt the conservatives would be able to rally around him. The moderate conservatives would probably have a problem with Tagle as well. I don't expect him to become the next pope. Okay, next I want to look at a video from Cardinal Nichols, who is a cardinal from England. And this is posted from the Catholic Church of England and Wales on their X page. And he says some things here that I think can be construed as really going against Francis, even though the way he puts it at times, I just don't understand where some of these cardinals get their knowledge from. It's a bit frustrating. But I do think you can listen to this and say, similar to what we said with Bishop Barron, there are subtle critiques being made, or sometimes even not so subtle critiques of Pope Francis. And this is showing that even people like Cardinal Nichols, who I wouldn't call an arch conservative, they're coming out against what we saw in the Pope Francis pontificate. Let's take a listen.
My own thoughts have centered around this combination of Peter and Paul. I mean, from St. Paul, clearly many people expect the Pope to be an effective and even dramatic voice of Christ, of the gospel in the world, contributing to the well-being of our human family. But there's also Peter, and in some ways the Pope is the successor of Peter. And
pausing there really quick, this is one of those things I was mentioning. He says in some ways the Pope is the successor of Peter. No, he is the successor of Peter. I've never heard a Catholic say that. In some ways he is. I suppose there might be a sense in trying to distinguish that he is not literally Peter. I don't understand what he's saying. It's obviously the chair of Peter. One can go into St. Peter's Basilica and have a clear understanding this is the successor of Peter. Perhaps he was just misspeaking. But I almost see this along the same lines of Pope Francis trying to say, well, that's not, he doesn't contain all of the primacy of Peter. That stuff is worrisome. I think we have to be very clear on that. But let's continue with what Cardinal Nichols said.
Of course, he's got to be a strong voice of the gospel, mercy and hope and love. But he's also got to confirm his brethren. He's got to hold people together. He's got to find a way through difficulties and tense moments. And Peter makes decisions. He has what we call a power of the keys. So he needs someone who is consistent and decisive, and who, I think, can say no to some things that he's asked, but doing it in a way that doesn't break any bonds of the communion of the church. I've always thought, authority in the Catholic Church is, yes, there is somebody who can say no to you, but he can also give you a hug. And those two things, I think, are very important in the Supreme Pontiff, the first one, who has to make these important decisions.
Well, that's certainly a message of the hugs and also saying no. There's problems with the message in that I think it assumes that the primary role of the Pope, and I say assumes almost as he's presupposing it, that the primary role of the Pope is this sort of traveling man who is sort of just putting this happy face on the Pope, and now we're rediscovering that, well, maybe the Pope is this source of doctrinal clarity, where I think this is really a reflection on just the dismal state of catechesis and doctrinal clarity in the post-conciliar period, where people are discovering that the Pope is supposed to be a source of doctrinal unity, when that's the primary that's the primary point of having the office of the Pope, having this doctrinal leader, the authority, the center of unity, where everyone can find their statement of faith. And the fact that people are struggling so much to find that and are really walking on thin ice to express it, that is disappointing. That should be something that is assumed, that we go into this and have no issue saying. Cardinal Nichols was very timid in how he went about going and saying that, because I know he must be afraid of what he would get if he started saying that the Pope must be doctrinally clear and say no to the heretics and things like this. I think he would do well to read Dietrich von Hildebrand's old book, the Charitable Anathema. I think people have lost a very basic sense of Christianity, understanding that there are certain things that are right, there are certain things that are wrong. We have to stop this sort of timid walking around these very basic tenets of Christianity. But at the end of the day, what Cardinal Nichols is saying there is something many of the liberals would be unwilling to say, and it puts you in a position where you're sort of aligning yourself with the critics of Pope Francis. Pope Francis notoriously wouldn't say no to just about anybody unless those people were celebrating the Latin Mass or criticizing the Novus Ordo. So I really think that this is showing that the College of Cardinals is skeptical towards Pope Francis moving into the conclave, and they would like to see some real doctrinal unity going forward. The final article I want to look at is very important because I think it really highlights some work that some good Catholics have done, Ed Penton and Diane Montagna, at putting together a great resource to really alleviate some of these problems of the cardinals not knowing each other and not knowing the positions or not knowing basic facts of the faith, which is this College of Cardinals report website they made. And they really got a trophy this week with a hit piece that was put out against them from CNN. And if CNN is writing a hit piece on you, you know you're probably doing something right, which was this article by Christopher Lamb. Cardinals choosing the next pope have been offered a dossier on candidates with a subtext. And so this article is really criticizing the College of Cardinals report. I'll read this first part, and you can see that I really found this article to be just quite biased and not understanding the work that these two people have done. I got to speak with both Ed and Diane. These are salt of the earth kind of people. They have a great knowledge of what's going on. They have the humility to realize they don't know everything about the situation. But what is this? They're not going out making wild predictions. They're not going out advocating certain cardinals. They're going out and saying, here are the issues. Here's where the cardinals fall. And I think they deserve nothing but praise for doing that. But just the fact of showing the cardinals' positions is enough to make the liberals squeamish, because they don't like the fact that some cardinals, I suppose, wouldn't just fall in line for whatever the liberals are trying to find Francis to. Here's what the article says. When the Cardinals enter the Sistine Chapel on Wednesday, at the start of the conclave, the process of electing a new pope, they will be sealed off from the world. But that doesn't stop people trying to influence the thinking of the 133 prelates who will choose a successor to the late Pope Francis. The electors are allowed to take in written materials, and in days leading up to the conclave, have been offered a book on their fellow cardinals, one which contains a clear message. Titled The College of Cardinals Report, it offers profiles on around 40 papal candidates, including a breakdown on where they stand on topics such as same-sex blessings, ordaining female deacons, and the Church's teaching on contraception. It also talks about the traditional mass, I'll say, and the China agreement as well. Very important issues. You notice this article targets those three, which are non-negotiables. There can't be same-sex blessings, there can't be female deacons, and there can't be a proper use of contraception. All of those things are condemned by the Catholic Church in an irreformable way. The subtext, the article says, choose a pope who will take the church in a different direction to Francis, whose progressive reforms have angered some conservatives. Well, if you look at the actual report, I mean, one can read that, and if you're reading it from a Catholic perspective, you're not going to get anything biased except for, well, what does the Catholic Church teach? Does the Catholic Church condemn contraception or does it not? The article goes on and says, the College of Cardinal Report is freely available online, but has also been produced as a large format book. One retired cardinal not eligible to take part in conclave told CNN he had received a hard copy. These cardinals have received it. I will say it's more than just that one. It goes on to say the report was compiled in association with Sophia Institute Press, a traditionalist-leaning publishing house based in New Hampshire, and Cardinals, a magazine based in Versailles, France. And Sophia Institute has done a really good job publishing a lot of stuff. They go on to, this article condemns it for saying they published the radically anti-Francis Crisis magazine, and in 2019 published the book Infiltration, which claims that in the 19th century, a group of modernists and Marxists hatched a plan to subvert the Catholic Church from within. Meanwhile, Cardinalis regularly features articles on prominent conservative cardinals. Oh, how dare they? How dare they post articles from conservative cardinals? But we're seeing how the mainstream world is really going on to attack even moderately conservative visions of what the church should be. And I don't think they're going to be successful, if I might say. I think many of the cardinals can read through this. Unless someone was so rabidly anti-Francis as to have completely no idea about why other people might have an issue, I think they're going to realize that there are some things that need to be taken care of in the Catholic Church. So I think leading up into this conclave, we've seen a few things. We've seen progressives lose a lot of steam, as we saw with Cardinal Tagle, surrounded by scandal. Same thing applies with Cardinal Parolin, who we reported on a couple days ago now. We've seen that the conservatives have come and organized, both the actual cardinals themselves making clear, good strategical decisions and have a good strategy when it comes to their messaging. But we've also seen those outside of the conclave, like with the College of Cardinals report, allow a resource for people to be educated and not caught up in the various politicking, trying to strong arm their way with these various liberals into the papacy itself. So now all that's really done, that needs to be done, is for us to pray. And I don't mean this in a virtue signaling way. I mean this in the sense that we need to come together as the church to pray for these men who are making a big decision. If we're Catholics and we believe in the reality of prayer, then we're going to believe in the reality of communal prayer as well. And that means coming together, praying for these cardinals, realizing that we actually have some power in influencing this by asking our Lord to give us a pope, as our editor-in-chief said, a pope that we need, not one that we deserve. And so hopefully we can obtain that with what these cardinals decide. Hopefully it won't be too long to make an instability within the church. But all we can do is pray at this point, hope, and learn more about the faith so that we're educated on these issues ourselves. So from all of us here at Catholic Family News, may God grant you many joyful years.